We are back on Taking Care of Business on News Talk, 1180, 1230 KGEO, 1410 KERI, 1000 KKIM, and now on the Internet on knookmedia.com, serving Richmond, Oakland, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Our guest by phone is a candidate for Secretary of State, Dan Schnur. So, Dan, one other question as far as Peter Ueberroth. I liked him a lot. He was a real winner when it came to the Olympics. I mean, he made that a profitable thing. Where I don't know if it's run a profit since then.
It is not.
Yeah. I mean, the last one in Moscow, was a terrible waste of money. Considering all the PR they didn't get right afterwards.
But a cover for some other things that took place.
Yeah,
Precisely.
Exactly
Right.
Yeah, and that was the reason. So you're running as a Republican, for a race that we both agree.
I thought you're an independent.
No.
That's exactly right. I'm running as an independent for this office.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Now, and this goes back to the point I made earlier. The state's chief elections officer shouldn't be playing for one side or the other.
Right.
You want an honest broker in charge of the elections, and I think the office should be made into a nonpartisan one. That's why I'm running as an independent.
Okay, now, Dan, bear with me here. Under the new format, they take the top two regardless of party, right?
Right.
So, as an independent, is that going to work for you or against you?
We think that helps me. In a general election with one Republican and one Democrat on the ballot, the independent might get squeezed in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But with 4 Democrats in the race, 2 Republicans, and just for good measure, a Green Party candidate, we think that creates the space for an independent, not just because voters think that an independent ought to be overseeing the office, but one of the things I'm talking about that you're not hearing from either party is what I want to do is I want to break the link between political giving and government action in Sacramento. And what I've been fighting for is a ban on fundraising at any time that the legislature is in session. I'm not looking to interfere with anybody's legitimate First Amendment rights to give money to a candidate or cause that they agree on. What I'm saying is let's let our legislators do the job they were elected to do first each year. And then once they've done the work of the people, then they can raise money for the next campaign. I just don't think they should be doing both at the same time.
So, Dan, you, going on another subject, you also, I believe, taught or teach at a couple of different universities. One is USC, where I have a lot of friends that went to. And then you also teach at Berkeley. Is that correct?
That's right. I have a full-time job at USC as the director of their Institute of Politics. But I teach a course each fall semester up at Cal as well.
That must be quite a different situation at those two schools.
They're very different campuses. Although I will say this, neither one of them really fits the stereotype that a lot of people have of them. On the Berkeley campus, much of the real raging voices, I'll say, tend to come from the community these days rather than from the student body. They're both great schools, and at both of them, it's been a neat opportunity for me to encourage young people to get involved in politics and government. I brag about them all the time, but I have more than 100 former students working in politics or government in Sacramento or Washington or elsewhere around the country. And even on both sides of the aisle, they're really making a difference. It's a great job. We saw recently in the news where there's one college where they don't want Condoleezza Rice to speak, or there's one small group that doesn't want her to speak.
Rutgers, yeah.
Yeah, so she's backed off. Now, what do you think about this? Do you think that people should be willing to listen to both sides?
Oh my gosh. At the beginning of every semester at both schools, I tell my students, I say my single biggest pet peeve in higher education are professors who think they're entitled to use their classroom as a bully pulpit, from the left or the right, to inflict their own ideology on the students. What I tell the students is I said, look, you've heard the adage about teaching a man to fish. Well, here's what I believe. Tell somebody what to think, and they won't know what to think tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Teach them how to think, and they'll be able to think for the rest of their lives. I want to make sure that my students from the left to the right understand how to think, rather than me trying to browbeat them into agreeing with one point of view or the other. I think what Rutgers did was absolutely inexcusable.
It's funny, Dan. I teach a critical thinking class at a university here in Bakersfield, and I was talking about the Condoleezza Rice thing last night, and the week before, I nailed one kid on the right and one kid on the left when it came to Donald Sterling and the hypocrisy on both sides. So everybody was laughing as I nailed one on each side of the fence. But I totally agree with you. You've got to be able to take the blinders off so kids can see both sides of the spectrum and look at it without the tunnel vision that unfortunately people are, caught up in nowadays.
Sounds like one of us is copying the other one's syllabus, because I tell my students exactly the same thing.
Boy, I would love to teach at SC.
Well, it is a lot of fun, and I really do try to deliver the same message to my students that you do to yours, which is it's important to listen to the other side, not necessarily because they're going to change your mind,
Mm-hmm.
at least they're going to open it.
Yeah.
Understand why people have come to different decisions than you have. If nothing else, it's going to equip you better to persuade them.
Exactly, no question about it. We're having a conversation with Dan Schnur, who's running for Secretary of State.
Now, if you'd want more information on Dan, the place to go is www.forschnur, and that's number 4, and it's spelled SCHNUR.com, forschnur.com.
But it's pronounced like the character.
Or Schnur.
Schnur.
Well, I don't know if it is or isn't. Is it, Dan?
Well, we simply say for sure.
For sure, for Schnur.
I'm having too much fun with that, Dan.
Yeah, at least he remembered your name. He hasn't remembered some of them in the past.
It's been a long day.
You know what? When you're running for office and you're running down ballot, the most important thing is to get people to remember your name. Thanks to you guys, none of your listeners are going to forget mine. For Schnur.
And it's for Schnur.
You're right.
Very good. I got a feeling he's used that line before.
One thing in Bakersfield.
Maybe once or twice.
If you get close to winning an election in Bakersfield, one of the neat things is the other party will find a lot of votes in the trunk of somebody's car.
Well, that's something Dan's...
I grew up near Chicago. What do they say? Vote early and vote often.
Yeah,
that's
even
true.
the dead vote in Chicago, don't they?
At least once. So tell me about the Voices of Reform project. That's something you were one of the founders and co-chairman of?
Exactly. And to me, this is an example about how principled conservatives and principled liberals may disagree on most things, but can occasionally find ways to work together. And what we did is we put together a very bipartisan group that worked to change the way legislative and congressional districts are drawn in California, and to reform the redistricting process, to take the process of drawing the lines away from the politicians themselves and eliminate the conflict of interest by letting it be done by the voters.
Amen.
And to me, it's a perfect example. You guys know Ronald Reagan used to say, somebody who agrees with me 80% of the time isn't my enemy, he's my friend. I would add to that, particularly when it comes to this kind of bipartisan cooperation. Someone who disagrees with me 80% of the time isn't my enemy. If somebody I can work with 20% of the time, I just got to work a little bit harder to figure out what that 20% is.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'll fight them faithfully and valiantly on the other things. But when there is an opportunity to do it, to get work done, as Ronald Reagan showed when he was president, you ought to do it.
That definitely is a Ronald Reagan approach. I mean, definitely. You look at his management style, and I'm just totally impressed by it. And one of the things I do in class, in a management class that I teach, is talk about the difference between Carter and Reagan. Carter, arguably is probably the most intelligent man that ever held the office, but he micromanaged. Where Reagan knew what he didn't know, and he was smart enough to put people in positions that were able to do the things that he couldn't do.
Are you talking about Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy Carter, yes.
The smartest man?
It's a great point. The story goes that President Jimmy Carter used to schedule who used the White House tennis courts himself rather than delegating that to an assistant.
Well, that's because he wanted to have it available.
Get lost in the forest for the trees. I had a very good friend, one of my first bosses, who worked in the Reagan White House, and she said when you worked for Ronald Reagan, his direction was absolutely clear. Everything that came into your office, you thought to yourself, is this going to cut taxes, shrink government, increase our national security? And if you knew the answer to that question, you knew what to do because he set out such clear and broad guidelines.
So what is Dan going to do? What's his proposal to get people re-involved in politics?
I think there's a couple of things hopefully we can talk about. One, as I mentioned earlier, I think for most citizens who don't have their own super PACs or their own lobbyists to schedule lunches and dinners with them in Sacramento or Washington, I think we have to break the link between political giving and government action, because otherwise what you have now is a group of very wealthy special interests on both sides of the aisle that buy themselves access so that normal citizens like you and I don't get our voices heard. If you go to Sacramento during session, what you guys will see, and you probably have, is that every breakfast, every lunch, and every dinner is a fundraiser.
Yes.
And so what you see is a relay race in which the members of both parties, the politicians from both parties, rush off the floor of the Assembly or Senate, run across the street into downtown Sacramento to the nearest bar or restaurant or watering hole. They pick up a stack of special interest donations from people with interest on bills being voted on in the legislature, and then the politicians sprint back across the street to vote on those bills before the ink on the check is even dry.
Yeah, Dan, I'm going to hate to interrupt you. Again, the website real quick, Clay?
www.forschnur.com.
We'll be back in 167 hours on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180. And Dan, thank you so much for the time.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.